Thank you. Thank you everyone for joining us today for our webinar, Differentiated Instruction, presented by Dr. Manuel Rosa, Graduate School of Education, Professor and Advisor. And also here is his email address if you have any questions or you'd like to contact him, mrosa@keiseruniversity.edu.
All right, well, thank you very much. It is a pleasure being here once again to talk about differentiated instruction. Depending on what time you are watching this recording or live version, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening. Like I said, I'm Dr. Manuel Rosa, and I am going to talk a little bit about differentiated instruction. We may also have a guest speaker, one of my students, join in and chime in as well and speak about her experiences. So we'll let you know if that's going to happen. Our outcomes for today are to define differentiated instruction, identify differentiation instructional strategies, and then if we do have some participation, share some best practices, and I do have some best practice suggestions as well. So to begin our presentation, I have a quote here from KP Gerlich. Our task is to provide an education for the kind of kids we have, not the kind of kids we used to have or want to have, or the kids that exist in our dreams. We may have, as educators, as teachers, as educational leaders, an ideal thought about what our classroom should look like, what our students should look like. But as we know, every day, every hour, every period, the classroom dynamics change, the classroom learning styles change, and it's important that we tailor to our students and give them the attention they need by providing resources such as, and strategies and techniques such as differentiated instruction. This image, I always include this image in many of our presentations because you will hear about different strategies and best practices, and some of you may be thinking, I'm already asked to do this, the state has asked me to do this, I have to follow the standards, now you're telling me I have to differentiate instruction, and you may be feeling like you're being pulled in multiple directions. But keep in mind that if our goal is to educate students and our goal is to make sure that we take students from A to B, then providing differentiated instruction is one strategy that should be used and followed and shared to make sure that you are able to present that. And before we continue, I believe that one of the students in our Master's in Science and Education program at Keiser University is on the line with us. Her name is Colleen Christie. So maybe Colleen, you can introduce yourself and then just say a little bit about your title and experience.
Hi, can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So I am a special education teacher at Country Hills Elementary. Oh, okay, I can't keep this, sorry. So I have students that are intellectually disabled, grades K through 2. But what I really wanted to highlight is the fact that every child is unique. Every child is different. Every child has different learning styles. As much as you want to plan ahead before meeting these students how you're going to differentiate the instruction, you really can't until you get to know them very well. That's academically, socially, their families, pretty much everything about the child. Because even small things about their life can give you cues into how you can change your lesson into ways that are more meaningful to them. I have students with all different ranges of abilities. Some of them have more difficulty with fine motor skills, so I do like to incorporate fine motor into the activities that we do as far as curriculum. So some of my students might be learning sight words while the rest of my students are being exposed to the sight words, but using fine motor skills as well. So for example, I have students learning their letters with Play-Doh cutouts thoughts. And having that hands-on activity for a student who normally wouldn't be able to focus on a worksheet is a part of that differentiating instruction, is utilizing different activities that also incorporate that topic or whatever it is you want them to learn. So let's say I have a student identifying the letter B with Play-Doh. I also am blowing bubbles for the letter B, and I have students popping the bubbles using their fine motor skills to pop the bubbles with, let's say they don't use their left hand very often and we need them to be interacting. So they're also saying B bubble, learning the letters and the sounds while using their fine motor skills as well. That's one example.
All right, thank you very much, Colleen. Colleen will be chiming in during the presentation, sharing her experiences. I know most of you are focused on middle school and high school, but these are just sample strategies and sample techniques that you still can be able to apply to whatever content that you're trying to teach. So Colleen will be chiming in, and we thank you for that, Colleen, for your experience.
I didn't hear anything on my side.
No problem. So differentiated instruction. Our official definition, according to Tomlinson, for those of you who are maybe considering pursuing a master's or PhDs and into research, differentiation means tailoring instruction to meet individual needs by differentiating the content, process, products, or the learning environment. And we're going to go through each of those areas and provide some tips and define them further. Or you can also look at this definition. Differentiated instruction is an approach to teaching in which educators actively plan for students' differences so that all students can best learn. In the differentiated classroom, teachers divide their time, resources, and efforts to effectively teach students who have various backgrounds, readiness, skill levels, and interest. So this ties back into the image that we saw, many different components in differentiated instruction, but nothing that cannot be achieved with a little bit of focus and a little bit of effort, with the ultimate goal, of course, of helping our students. So here's another graph of learners and who our learners are, especially in the 21st century with this generation that is used to having instant access to technology. But our students who are in our classrooms want to feel connected. They want to feel motivated. We want to create them into lifelong learners, make sure they're engaged, collaborative, prepare them to be global citizens. So these are the learners, and this is why differentiated instruction is so important. So why should you differentiate? Well, first, it supports students with various learning differences. Not all students are the same, as Colleen has mentioned. It helps students retain content and skill. It reduces time students take to process information, and allows different ways for learners to demonstrate learning. There isn't the one-size-fits-all. For all of your lessons, you're going to have a learning outcome or a learning objective, and different students are going to express in different ways how they master the content. And it's up to us as educators to provide those different ways that students feel best to express themselves. So what is a traditional versus a differentiated classroom? If I walked into your classroom, how would I know, how would anyone know there's differentiated instruction occurring? Here are some things that stand out. First of all, there's a consideration of student differences, short-term groups, and that is identifying the strengths and weaknesses or areas of improvement for students and grouping them in two ways, either grouping all of them with the same performance level in one group at times, or also combining and having different levels of performance work together to help and to teach each other. So if I saw that going on, I would know this was a differentiated classroom. Use of assessment. Sometimes we're quick to give a multiple choice test, but creating something that has a number of well-constructed choices that addresses strengths and opportunities for improvement. That could be it could also be verbal, pictorial. Use of learning styles, so the different learning styles would be obvious and apparent. Your instructional format, the way you deliver the material, will be engaging and interesting activities and providing options for assignments. providing options for those that need a little assistance, providing an option for those that are meeting expectations, and providing options for those that are going above and beyond and maybe could extend the learning with some higher order thinking. There are some assumptions when you think about differentiated instruction. It does come with some assumptions that we make when we're starting to implement this or continuing to enhance our knowledge of it, and that is that all learners are different. A teacher's response to learners' preferences and interests and readiness. So we're assuming that teachers are in their classrooms taking notes about their students and really understanding in groups what their preferences are and interests are. It's an organized framework for teaching and learning, but it does provide flexibility, and it is tailored on the assignments and the objectives that you create. But it does not mean providing separate, unrelated activities for students. If you have 28 students in your class, you're not providing 28 different activities to meet all the learners. You're providing just various opportunities that students can select based on what their abilities are and placing them in groups. So if I had the ideal differentiated classroom, here are the 9 steps or 9 things that would be occurring. And here's a nice chart. For those of you watching on recording, you may want to take a screenshot of this. But this is the flow of instruction in a differentiated classroom. Number 1, teacher and the whole class begin to explore a concept, and that's something that you probably would predetermine. Students are engaging. For step 2, students engage in further study using varied materials based on readiness and learning style. Step 3, students and teacher come together to share information and then pose questions. Step 4, students work on varied assigned tasks designed to help them make sense of key ideas at varied levels of complexity and varied pacing. Step 5, the whole class reviews key ideas and extends their study through sharing. This gives you the opportunity to provide an informal assessment of who's learning the material and who needs extra support. Group 6, in small groups selected by students, they apply key principles to solve teacher-generated problems related to their study. Groups number 7, the whole class is introduced to the skills needed later to make a presentation. 8, students self-select interest areas through which they extend their understanding. And then 9, the whole class listens to individual study plans and establishes baseline criteria for success. So notice this ebb and flow, this back and forth between teacher-led and then students learning from each other, and then back to the entire classroom as a whole. And it's this rhythm, this repetition that maximizes the opportunities for learning. So if you were starting from scratch and your school has mandated that differentiated learning must take place, these are 4 steps to planning differentiation. Number 1, determine the content or skill. So what is it that you want to teach? Gauge students' background knowledge. This may require speaking to previous instructors, previous teachers about students, especially if it's in the beginning of the year. Then that's when you get to be creative for step 3 and select suitable instructional methods and materials, making sure you're catering to all diverse learning styles. And then finally, creating ways to assess mastery, and that's the different assessment instruments or different ways you can assess whether students are learning or not and where they are on the spectrum of learning. For the remainder of the presentation, we're going to go over the 4 elements of differentiation, and that is content, what you're taught, process, how you taught it, product, how the students are demonstrating learning, and then the learning environment, how to make the classroom feel and work together. Colleen, did you have anything to chime in before I get started, or you want me to continue?
No, go ahead. I'll chime in a bit.
Thank you. I didn't want to make sure I'm dominating all of your talking points. All right, here we go. So content, what students need to learn or how they will access the information. So these are different strategies you can do. Use pre-test to assess students' needs and strengths, and that could be in the beginning. It could be in the beginning of a specific time period or at the beginning of the lesson, so you know where students are at in your classroom. Use a variety of instructional delivery methods to assess different learning styles, and there are plenty of tools out there, especially on the website that was shared with you earlier. For the Multidisciplinary Center, lots of tools out there that talks about the different instructional delivery methods. And then you want to divide assignments into smaller, more manageable parts. So once again, going back to if you have the 3 students that are not performing well, or performing high, you can divide up the assignments and give everyone what they need to feel challenged, or what support they need to go on. The process, we talked about tiered assignments to support all learning styles. When you create activities, make sure it promotes and you assess student learning so you can see how the students are doing. You want to create activities that engage students, that are going to help them make sense of the content and master the content. Because you're going to have in your classroom students that can obtain material quickly and at times may take a little longer, you want to vary that length of time, have extra activities in hand for those that may be getting it or that have already gotten it, and then also have them also teach students and mentor those by forming groups. You want to provide access to a variety of materials, and then you will want to establish stations, different stations within your classroom where people can do independent activities, or where the students can ask questions and use some of that support or that high order thinking. And you may want to place yourself in one of those stations as well for that support if you're not roaming around the classroom monitoring them, especially if you have an assistant, if you're fortunate enough to have one of those. Create activities that vary in level of complexity and degree of abstract thinking. Going back to it's not the one size fits all. And use flexible grouping to group and regroup students based on factors including content, ability, and assessment results. Those should always be your focus. The product allows the students the opportunity to demonstrate what they've learned, and it should be something that they're proud of, and it is tailored to their strengths of how they express themselves. So you want to have comprehensive assignments that ask students to explain what they learned. You want to provide choices for assignments, give them opportunities to demonstrate through various assessment strategies. Give students the opportunity to work independently or in groups if that opportunity presents itself. Some of our students may need a little bit more encouragement. Some of the students may be very against working in groups, and you will have to engage that as their teacher, what's safe environment and what's best for them. And you want to make sure your assessment is ongoing and interactive.
I can say something now.
Yes.
So for assessment, it doesn't have to be something so formal every time. It can be something as simple as just observing the student, seeing that they have difficulties with a certain subject, and again, like you said, providing options, and that helps to really build up their self-esteem and have them feel confident that they can choose something that might be more interesting than the other option, or just keep them involved in the activity and don't let them feel like they need to give up. But definitely, grouping and using those independent activities where they can choose what they would like to do. And again, observing can be the assessment. That's what I do with my students. They're so young that, they don't have a paper pencil based assessment or anything like that. So I observe where they're struggling, and it's easy for me to tell based on their behavior as well, how they feel or how they're capable of doing a certain task.
Thank you, Carlene. And if you can also add, we're talking about the learning environment. What is a typical classroom, or what do you use in your classroom to make students feel safe and to promote the differentiated learning environment?
I missed the beginning of that question, sorry.
Oh, how do you create, what do you do to make sure your learning environment is inclusive to different learning styles? Is there physical stuff that you put on the walls, or how you organize your classroom, the classroom itself?
Yeah, I do group my students with either myself, or I actually am lucky enough to have 2 assistants this year. So I'll have, a group doing, working on their goals of choosing their preferred activities in what I call the break room. It's like a playroom where they can identify toys that they like, interact with toys. We're also learning how to play with toys, and I have students who just kind of throw them to the side, like, what is this? Why are you giving this to me? So we're learning how to interact with these manipulatives. And then I'll have another station where we're working hands-on with Play-Doh or slime. I have this stuff, it's like Theraputty. So again, fine motor, they can pull little letters out of the slime. But yeah, the grouping kind of organizes it. Everybody is always positively reinforced. Throughout the day, we're constantly telling them how much of a good job they're doing, and just if they don't want to do something, we give them another option. So we always just continue to keep them involved and keep their hands busy, and that always helps with behavior as well.
Thank you very much. And once again, you may not be putting Play-Doh in middle school and high school, but just providing some type of engagement activity. And people like to remember their earlier years anyway, so but Play-Doh probably wouldn't be an issue. So the learning environment, like Colleen said, break students up into groups. If you're focusing, let's say, on a specific reading group, you want to break them into reading groups to discuss the assignment. You may want to allow students to read individually and then create spaces with no distractions. It's all about how you create the layout of the room. Our previous workshop, we talked about morning meetings and the importance of having a defined space if your classroom allows, where people know that that's the space where they can share and open up and communicate. So ideally, the entire classroom would be that way as well. So assessment, a lot of people think, you may think multiple choice or paper and pencil, but here are just, this visual alone says 101 ways to show what you know, whether it be poster, bulletin board, written, concept maps, board game, spoken, poetry, dance, debate. So there are many different ways to assess, and creative and fun ways to assess how our students are learning. So if you are watching this on record, you may want to also take a screenshot of this, or just email me at mrosa@keiseruniversity.edu, and we will send you the PowerPoint. So remember, assessment drives instruction. Once you create your lesson and your learning outcomes, you'll want to assess whether students are learning or not. It's consistent throughout the lesson, either formally or informally. One option may be to help students chart and contribute to their own growth. And that information helps you to do that, whether you're taking formal notes, where you have a folder or a notebook that talks about what you learned about the student and their learning style. And if you do take those notes, it's important that you share them, if students are going on to another classroom, that you share them with other teachers as well. So together, holistically, when some of you may have a behavior specialist or be this behavior specialist, you can do what's best for the student by having everyone's observations. And make sure your assessment is focused on personal growth more than on peer competition. Even when you're putting students in groups or you're assigning groups a group grade, you can also base them on their individual efforts and grade them accordingly as well. So some differentiating tips for readiness. You want to, if we're just focusing, taking one example and focusing on reading, you want to vary text by reading level, all about providing students options. Same thing with the supplementary materials, by reading level. Vary your scaffolding, provide tiered tasks, tiered products, utilize small groups, and you can form them by abilities. Provide homework or mix it up. Provide homework options. So that would give students the opportunity to demonstrate what they've learned based on their ability at that time. Assessments, and then negotiate criteria for quality varied graphics. Here's another image. Now that we're in 2018 going into 2019, with the increase in technology using Bloom's taxonomy, there are so many different ways to follow Bloom's taxonomy, other than remembering with understanding, applying, analyzing, evaluating, and creating. Depending on your level, probably will be at remembering, depending on the grade, but all those different technology resources that you can use. And I know that the Multidisciplinary Center also gives out a newsletter every month that has technology suggestions for apps that teachers can use and students can use. So definitely review those and go back and review those to help you see what's out there that can help you assess and implement a differentiated instruction. So finally, we're going to have some specific strategies that you can use, and it'd be a summary of what we've been presenting all throughout the presentation. You should be asking yourself at all times, before you start a lesson and before you even plan the lesson, do all students have access to the tools, knowledge, and guidance they need to succeed? Technology may not always be available in the home, or may not always be working or have access. So you want to keep that in mind when providing assignments that use technology. You want to start slowly, unless you are very experienced with this differentiated instruction, but you want to start slowly. Make sure you organize your classroom space and identify areas as possible that are be breakouts to create centers, so that way students know or can expect, especially those that need structure and guidance and need to follow a similar format so they know what to expect. Find out what student interests are. That could be formally or informally. Use technology. Start class with familiar tasks. You may know those as do now. These you take the first 10 or 15 minutes or whatever time you allocate to maybe reinforce an idea that's about to occur, or review a concept that was from the previous day. So you want to do your do nows. And then create student report or data folios. They can either be physical folders or they could be something you do electronically. But this helps to track your observations on students and their learning. And as I stated before, ideally these would be passed on and shared with other teachers to work on what's best for the students. You want to, as much as possible, ensure students buy into what they are doing by promoting the benefits of the learning and tying it into something they may apply immediately, whether it be on the playground, at the lunch, or an interaction they're going to have with their family members. Provide choice to students, choice through assignments, choice through assessments. And then as students are older or more advanced in the lesson, hold them accountable for teaching each other and for performing better, making sure you always challenge them when necessary, but also supplement that challenge with support. And create various assessment strategies, posters. You can have them do models, clay models, or with the Play-Doh, performances, if you have a creative group, drawings, portfolios, group pictures. Going back to that slide, it really is about honing in on the student's talent and the way they express themselves, and in a controlled environment, trying to do that. I know in some of our classrooms, when you put on music or you put on the ability to perform, then there are some students that may be more disruptors than others, or some of our nonverbal students may not want to engage, but maybe with some music, they would express themselves in other ways. So think about what's best for your classroom. Assistive technology, if you're fortunate enough to have access to that, screen readers, voice recognition, talking dictionaries, that's going to help students. Collaborative activities, lower function groups can improve when working with more academically capable students. That's the preferred way that you would organize your groups. provide opportunities for cooperative learning, explicit modeling. Our students need repetitive over and over, need to be demonstrated, what needs to be done, how they should be doing things. So be very specific when you're talking about note-taking, about how to ask questions, project planning, and time management. You want to role model it, but you want to make it very intentional and tell students exactly what you are doing. Feedback. Students take feedbacks in different ways, written, oral, some pulled to the sides. Individual feedback is always preferred, so you want to make sure that you also know your students, how they are receptive to feedback. Graphically, making concept maps, Venn diagrams, cause and effect charts, story maps, T-charts, and timelines for those that are visual or those that aren't as engaged verbally. Having those concept maps for those that think abstract would be one strategy for differentiating your instruction. Various levels for reading materials, modified directions, multi-sensory approach, peer tutoring, tapping into prior knowledge, and it could be experiences that they've had maybe outside the classroom that you can relate, or current events that you can relate to the lesson that you're having. A visual component that ties into the graphic organizers. All right, we were going to have a small discussion, but you're probably watching our recording. But if you're having a lunch with fellow teachers, or you want to take it back, this is definitely stuff you can talk about. Having the teachers talk about the content, the process, and the product, and how they differentiate that based on readiness, interest, and learning profiles, like we've discussed throughout this presentation. Colleen, you have anything to add for our conclusion? Some summary comments and experiences that you have had with differentiated instruction?
Well, I just want to highlight again the importance of getting to know the students and how really important that is. Just getting to know everything about them, and especially their interests. I use their interests to incorporate, the lessons, changing the lessons so that they are somehow involved with Paw Patrol or, the fun cartoons that they like to watch. And it keeps them motivated and interested, and as well as differentiates for students who, let's say, one is working on something to earn Paw Patrol, or, another student is coloring an activity to earn something that they're interested in. But again, differentiating the instruction based on their interests and their abilities. You don't want to make your fish climb trees. So definitely getting to know the students' abilities and taking it from there.
Thank you, Colleen. And I understand we do have people that are on the call. So if anyone would like to chime in, whether through the chat, or discuss how you've differentiated instruction in the classroom, or if you haven't, how you plan on how you can explore it further in 2019. So if I was doing this differentiated instruction, I would break you up into groups, so I can be the role model for differentiated instruction. But we do have a small group, so we'll do that together. I don't know if we can unmute, or if people can unmute their phones, or if they can write it in the chat. But if you can talk a bit about your experience with differentiated instruction, or what you can implement in 2019, that would be ideal. And I can't read one thing, I can't see the chat, so Dr. Miller, if you can chime in or tell me if anyone's typing up anything. Or
Yes, at this time I don't see anything written in the chat box, but we do have a couple of participants. I see one may have just, no, I don't see anything in the chat right now.
Okay. All right. So thank you very much. So in conclusion, another image for those of you watching on record or live, and you want to screenshot that. There are many components of differentiated instruction. but the key goal is to ensure that our students, we're doing the best for our students based on their abilities, and that we focus on the students by providing different strategies, different ways to enhance learning by practicing differentiated instruction. I know in some schools this is a mandate, and in other schools it's more optional. But rest assured, in the future, as students are getting more used to technology and straying away from traditional methods of learning, teachers are going to have to also make that adjustment and provide different strategies for students based on their abilities through multiple platforms and formats. So that's why it's definitely important for our Generation Zers who are coming into our schools and making a name for themselves. Does anyone have, and think about how you're going to implement, for those of you on the line, how you implement the information learned from today's session, and who will you share it with and when?